And with us now, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli at the United Nations, Richard Haass, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Elise Labott, Edward R. Murrow, Press Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, and Philip Rucker, National Editor for The Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. So, Mike, what else did we hear from the President in his speech?
Well, Jose, as is often the case with this kind of address, the president did tick through sort of a laundry list of some of the major, but also some of the less talked about global challenges we're facing at this moment. I think one of the questions that we had heading into this speech was what role the fact of the president leaving office after half-century on the world stage here as a senator, as vice president, and 4 years as president, what role would that play in this speech? Well, the president from the get-go talked about just that fact. He really walked us through the decades of his time dealing with foreign policy to try to give examples of the ways in which engaging in diplomacy, in strengthening our alliances, working with our allies, and working through important institutions like the UN has brought about solutions to once intractable challenges. He then tried to sort of summarize his view, which is that, yes, there are always going to be forces trying to pull us apart, but that our task as world leaders is to always strengthen the forces that bring us together, make sure that they are more powerful. But there is no more intractable challenge facing this president, of course, at this moment than the situation in the Middle East, not just the ongoing efforts to bring about a hostage deal and a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, but now the escalating situation in Lebanon. You heard the president address this directly. Take a listen.
I put forward with Qatar and Egypt a ceasefire and hostage deal. It's been endorsed by the UN Security Council. Now is the time for the parties to finalize its terms, bring the hostages home, and secure security for Israel and Gaza free of Hamas' grip, ease the suffering in Gaza, and end this war.
Now, the other big question over this speech, Jose, of course, is the question of what will happen in the United States election this November, and what role will that mean in terms of changing, perhaps, U.S. foreign policy. And to that end, as the president was discussing another major challenge right now, the war in Ukraine, he mentioned by name Vice President Harris is working with him to stand up to Russian aggression. Jose, that's the first time in the 4 years he has addressed the United Nations as president that he mentioned his vice president, an important piece of context here as we look to the election in 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's certainly a very important piece of context there. So, Elise, you think that the president focused enough about what is happening in the Middle East and specifically on the deal with, Gaza and Israel, and that and all of those negotiations that have been going on and that as of this moment haven't really been able to reach any concrete agreement?
I mean, look, Jose, these speeches are really not supposed to deal with one particular conflict for a U.S. president because they're really dealing with all these global challenges. And as Mike said, he listed this whole laundry list and how the international community is supposed to work together. And this is one conflict that the U.S. really can't work with other allies. Yes, they're working with the Egyptians and the Qataris and others, but it's really about whether the U.S. can put that pressure on Israel to make a deal. And that's one area where global cooperation doesn't really matter. I don't think the president came here to try and, close that deal. I think he came here to set his legacy. He could have spent more time on it, but he also had other things he wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about UN Security Council reform. That is something that's very important to this administration. Here at the council, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, the ambassador, came out and laid out this whole idea of how the U.S. wants to expand the Security Council for more permanent members to kind of get rid of that chokehold by Russia and China, which will still be very difficult. So I think he could have, added more meat on the bones on how he sees this playing out in the region, but he's really not going to get anything by trying to go on in the intricacies of a deal. And I think that's what he came to do, is set a legacy for himself.
Richard, I mean, it's easy to say, but, he was talking about 50 years of public service. And just thinking your thoughts on this speech, how effective was he in kind of bringing in the arc of an entire lifetime of experience and what we are currently dealing with around the world?
Well, look, the strength of it, Jose, is that he has been a player, a part of American foreign policy, not just for 50 years full stop, but for these 50 years. And that was the years that saw the United States steer the West to ultimately victory in the Cold War. We've managed, for better and for worse, the post-Cold War era of American primacy. The president embodies the idea of American leadership, of internationalism. His problem today, though, two things. One is he's a lame duck. He's got a few months left to his presidency. Everybody is focused on what comes next. Donald Trump hovers over this. The president can speak about Kamala Harris, and it's good that he did. And she does represent, if you will, continuity with the idea of American leadership and internationalism. But Donald Trump represents something very different, which is unnerving to many of our allies. And more specifically, or more immediately, the president, for all of his effort, for all of the effort of his top aides, the Secretary of State and others, we haven't been able to deliver a ceasefire in the Middle East. The war is widening. We haven't been able to stop the fighting in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. So it's an uncomfortable day in some ways. As good as the legacy is, if you will, looking back over the last 50 years, the current situation and the future, more questions than answers.
Yeah, Phil, I mean, what were your thoughts on that? Because I think Richard is so correct in the sense that there are so many hotspots, and there always have been and probably always will be hotspots around the world in any presidential administration. But Phil, I mean, let's look at what's going on. I mean, we have a very hot war, essentially, between Israel and Hezbollah. I mean, Lebanon is getting bombed left and right. And right now we're seeing that there's a new bombing campaign going on as we speak. We see what's going on, Russia and Ukraine. And, you know, the president, by the way, to his credit, spoke about Venezuela and what's going on there. What do you see, Phil, as the president's legacy on the world stage?
Well, the legacy that he hopes to leave is that he helped reaffirm America's standing in the world and brought back a sense of American leadership around the world after the Trump presidency from 4 years prior. But what you see right now is the limits of that American power. I mean, he and his administration are trying to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East. And as you put it, it is a hot war right now in terms of what's happening in Lebanon. And obviously, there's no ceasefire right now between Israel and Gaza. The Biden administration has spent a few years now trying to help Ukraine with its war against Russia, and that has been unending and has not come to a successful end. And meanwhile, you see the rise of China around the world. And so there are real limits right now to American power, and that, in a way, challenges the legacy that Biden hopes to leave. But I think one thing that's really disconcerting for a lot of the attendees at the United Nations who are watching Biden speak is they're listening to Biden and they're thinking about Trump because they know the U.S. election is so close and they know what's at stake and they know how much of a chance Donald Trump has of winning the presidency again and what that might mean for the world. And so that's part of this legacy as well.
And Richard, I mean, you speak with leaders, world leaders all the time. How do they see U.S. leadership right now? And to bring it back to, this concept of the limits of American power, is that limiting American power a reality of geopolitics, or is it a self-induced creation?
It's a good question, Jose, and the answer is both. To some extent, it's because of the rise of others. China, the fact that North Korea now has nuclear weapons and missiles, Iran has all these proxy groups. This is a world of distributed power, power in many hands, economically, politically, militarily, but it's also a result of us. It's the result of a lack of consensus. When the House of Representatives voted to cut off aid for months to Ukraine, the fact that there's growing isolationism in the United States. And that as a result, when the rest of the world looks at us, they don't quite recognize us and they don't quite feel reassured by us. And that works against, that eats away at our influence and our authority. So it's a combination of changes in the world that are inevitable and changes in the United States that are unfortunate.
How do you see it, Elise? Elise?
I think Richard is exactly right. But at the same time, I think the U.S. under the Biden administration, they've tried to rally the world, whether it's Ukraine or Israel, but the strategy is also a little unclear. Does the U.S. want Ukraine to win the war, or does it want it just not to lose? How does the U.S. see this war ending? It hasn't been very clear. Also in Israel, President Biden, yes, has shown a lot of support for Israel, but at the same time has been, as the election was approaching, trying to lean in more to the human rights for Palestinians. And we don't see how the administration sees this war ending. So I think the world is looking to the U.S. for leadership, and it's showing the leadership in terms of wanting to work with everybody. But they're looking for those strategies. And I just don't think this administration, and I think Richard is right, as years have gone by, the U.S. is showing leadership in terms of rallying the world, but not really setting out clear strategies and clear agendas for how it wants the world to follow it.